Holy sh**. What the hell did I just see, and how do I make babies with it? Sweet baby Yoda, was that hot? So we have some fairly momentous news to get into here. You're going to see and hear a lot about this from all the different channels and from Pixonic itself in the weeks and months to come as we get closer to this thing. No, I'm not pregnant. I'm sure some of you are worried about that, but I assure you, I'm pretty sure that I'm not pregnant, so that's not it. What is going on, though, is War Robots is being completely remastered. I've known about this for a little while now, but it's official, so we can start talking about it, getting into the details, making videos about it, and showing you guys all of the things that they're planning for this massive update is what it basically is to the game. It's a huge update. So my plan for this video is basically to share with you everything that I know currently. I'm going to break it up into several parts. I'm going to cover the broad strokes, the basic information of what I know, what we've been told about this update, this War Robots Remastered update. Then I'm going to get into some of the specifics. We were allowed to ask questions and pose different things to the developers via the community managers, and I'm going to get you those answers that I got to, at least to my questions and some of the other good ones that were asked. Then after we've gone through everything that I know, I'm basically going to give you my takeaway, my 2 cents, or maybe it's only worth 1 cent, but my 2 cents on what I think about all of this and where it's headed and what it means for the future of the game. So real quick before we get started here, they've asked us to ensure that we convey that this is a work in progress. So all the images that I show you, all the video clips and the gameplay and things that I show you in my videos, or that you see anywhere until this thing is finally released, it's all work in progress material. It can change, it will change. That's all industry standard stuff. So just bear that in mind as this thing develops. So what I'm going to do now is talk about all the basic information that we were given. While I do that, I'm going to run some gameplay footage in the background here. This isn't my footage. I haven't been able to play this yet. It's only Pixonic internal. There will be a test period coming up, and we're going to get into that. So I'll play it when you all get to play it. Towards the end of the video, I will put up a summary on the screen so you can kind of see at least the broad strokes of everything that we know up until this point. That way you don't have to go back through the video and rewind and try to listen for the part you were interested in. I'll list it all for you. So the first and most obvious thing to get into here are the improved graphics, the visuals. And before we really even get too deep into that, be aware that the footage that I'm showing you, this is the preset performance. You can see the watermark there in the lower left corner. So just pointing out that if you're impressed by what you see here, this is not even the ultra preset. I know what you're saying. You're saying, presets? Say what? I'm going to get into those a little bit later in the video, but first I'm going to focus primarily on just the visuals, just the graphics. We'll talk about presets shortly. Primarily, Remastered is a graphics update to the game. It was kind of born from their Steam version of the game. The Steam version was basically what could we do with the graphics given a much more powerful platform to run it on, such as a PC. Obviously here a few years down the road from the initial Steam release, your average iPhone or Galaxy or Samsung or whatever device, it's like what a desktop was a couple years ago practically. So initially this was just supposed to be about graphics, but what they decided to do rather than a sequel or a War Robots 2, if a couple of you remember a little while back, there was talk of like a 2.0, I heard rumors here and there. They decided to do Remastered. And instead of just redoing the graphics, from my understanding, it is a deep dive into every single core functionality of the game. Just from a graphics standpoint, we obviously have new models, new textures, the maps will be redone, all of the robots will be redone, the visual effects have been redone. I think it's pretty obvious as well from this footage that the lighting and shadows have also been redone. You can see the quality is just incredible. And again, this is supposedly the performance preset of the game. This is not even the ultra setting we'll get into later. From what I've been told as well, the game is supposed to be more stable. A lot of the back-end enhancements, and we'll get into those, a lot of the back-end enhancements have basically allowed for a more stable game. Now, bear in mind, these are all client-side improvements. War Robots Remastered almost entirely focuses on client-side improvements. We've been told as well that the graphics improvements will also supposedly generate less heat on your device and consume less battery. Now that we've discussed the visuals and the updated graphics, I think it's a good time to stop and point out that it appears that Remastered is primarily a visual update to the game. So I think we'll all kind of want to temper our expectations. It's not a 2.0. It's not a direct sequel. It is an improvement to the existing game. And based on a lot of the materials I've seen, there are a lot of back-end improvements as well. And we'll get into the specifics of that as we move forward in the video. Okay, now we're going to spend spend just a minute or two talking about the interface. This was the one area of the remastered documentation that they gave us that probably had the least info available in it. I did ask some follow-up questions, but I'm going to cover what I asked and what I got as an answer towards the end of the video when I give you all of my specific questions and follow-ups that I posed to the devs via the community managers. Basically what we were told, though, as it pertains to interface, was that there were several behind-the-scenes improvements, tweaks, optimizations. As I kind of went through the document, it sort of became obvious that there are a lot of things that you're not going to see. Even though this is such a visually stunning improvement to the game, there are also some things going on behind the scenes, and a lot of the stuff either isn't ready for development implementation, or it's just something that is going to allow them to make future changes to the game that previously, based on the old code of the 2014 War Robots that we've been playing for 6 years, just wasn't possible to do. A note too on this footage in particular with the interface there up on the screen. This is super widescreen format footage. All I did to make this video is basically shrink it to fit the frame that I put my videos in to make YouTube happy. This is like 3840 by 2160, so it's super wide. They probably did this on one of those ultra wide monitors my wife won't let me get for my office. Just kidding, honey. It doesn't matter. She doesn't watch my videos anyways. So that explains why if you look at the center top of the screen, it looks like the beacon bar and the red and blue players on each team is super tiny. Also of note in these clips here is that this was clearly shot in some type of developer environment. I've been told, however, that the graphics that you see are going to be at least as good or better. Again, this is the performance preset. This is the performance setting of the game for the graphics quality. And even though this isn't a developer environment, this is what it should look like or better on mobile. Another area of Remastered we were given some insight to had to do with game mechanics. Basically, that's any system in the game interacting with another system, how it all sort of fits together and works to produce the final product. So by and large, game mechanics are supposed to remain largely intact. So if something behaves a certain way now in the current War Robots build, it's probably going to behave similarly in the War Robots Remastered build. This was an area that I was really excited about. I was really hoping to see some more quality of life improvements, things on the back end. I'll get into some of my specific questions here towards the end of the video, but I was hoping for more on this. Initially, there wasn't a whole lot of info to be had, but I did a little digging and they were gracious enough to get me some more answers from the developers. So I do have a couple of things to share on that front. But again, something to bear in mind is that it sounds to me like a lot of this is sort of paving the way, laying the foundation for improvements later on down the road. That's what I'm really truly excited about with Remastered, is what's possible once this phase has been fully implemented. One of the things they were able to share is that there should be enhanced fidelity and performance in the game. Again, this is mostly a client-side update, so everything to do with a game running on your phone. The app running on your phone should be better. You should have greater fidelity, I would imagine, with manipulating your robot's actions in game, firing weapons, activating special abilities. I would assume that that should be a little bit smoother than what it currently is, and also just the general overall performance as it relates to game mechanics. So that would all be very welcome. Something else they were able to tell us that I found particularly interesting relates to weapon interactions. So when this goes live, the initial improvements to game mechanics should see enhanced weapon interactions, particularly related to special abilities. If you ever notice, like in game on live now, there is a frame rate drop a lot of times associated with activating a special ability, firing weapons. There's sort of a loss of continuity there that I've noticed, and they've said that they are going to address this in this initial release of War Robots Remastered. So that's something I would really look forward to. You can imagine, say for instance, running a Ravana and enabling translocate, or using phase shift and firing weapons in between and sort of off and on as it's going through all these different sort of statuses in the game. It's phased, it's translocated, and now it's present again physically and firing. To see all that happen a lot smoother than what's currently going on live would be awesome. So lastly, on the subject of game mechanics would be geometry. It is a part of game mechanics, and a big part in my mind is there are currently a lot of bugs in the game to do with geometry specifically. I am going to get into a couple of details I was able to sort sort of dig out of them when we asked our questions. So geometry will remain the same despite getting a facelift on the models and textures. It's mostly going to be the same, but I do have some specifics, and I'll get into those when I cover my specific questions that I asked the developers. So let's talk about something that could be fairly obvious, I think, to most of us, but some people could be worried about it. It's not a new game, but it is a major, massive update to the current game, and some might be concerned about their account progress. Now, I've read in the documentation, I've been assured by the developers and the community managers, absolutely your current progress in every way, shape, and form will be preserved. So anything you have now in the current game, you are going to have once this update hits. Resources, robots, clan progression, you name it. Cups, whatever it is, nothing should be affected. It's all going to be intact. Again, it's not a new game. It's an overhaul, it's an update, it's a remastering of what we have currently. They gave some reasons for why they decided not to split off into a separate game. They make sense, you divide the player base and then one of the games has to die so the other one can kind of go on. So absolutely do not worry about starting over, or if anything to do with your account is going to be affected by this, it should all be perfectly the same as it is now. Okay, so one of the very first things we talked about were the graphics, the visuals, which is obviously the major part of this entire remastered revelation. But now we're going to talk about graphics options or presets. This is really probably one of the biggest pieces of news to come out of this entire thing, and something that players have been asking for forever with this game. Most modern, top-of-the-line gaming apps allow you to set your graphics. You can customize them for your device. With Remastered, what we're going to see initially are 2 graphics presets. Now, I alluded to these earlier because the footage I was showing you guys is watermarked, and the footage that I have so far is the preset for performance, the performance preset. Being able to set your own graphics options were really one of the things that I had in mind earlier when I was talking about quality of life improvements. These are the types of things I'm really curious about as Remastered unfolds. So initially, we're going to get performance, and we're going to get what they're calling ultra. So first, let's talk about performance. The performance preset was basically described to us as a higher quality of graphics than what you currently have on the live version, but it should run much smoother and more stable than what we get currently. And again, you can see from the clips that I've been showing you guys, the performance preset is clearly amazing visually. It looks like something that you're playing on the Steam version or your computer, and it's going to be smoother and more stable, less battery consumption. That's a tall order. I really hope that they can live up to it, but I am super stoked about it. The Ultra preset is pretty obvious. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's just everything completely maxed out. Now, for testing purposes, and I'll describe testing for Remastered and when it's going to start and how it's going to differ from regular test server and when you guys are going to get access to it a little bit later in the video. But for the purposes of Ultra, that is something that's coming a bit later. I believe it'll be there at the initial release. However, the performance preset is what you're mostly going to deal with during the testing phase. Then as that progresses and is stable, they're going to introduce the ultra performance setting. So a couple caveats here when talking about not only the graphics options, the presets, but also the visuals of the game. All of this is going to be a monumental improvement to what you have now. So we've been informed that naturally some devices are not going to be able to handle the graphics even on the performance setting as well as they do the current live version. Much lower res, much less graphically intense. This new stuff is going to basically sort of draw a line of demarcation on which devices can run this thing. So some of the older devices that are out there that are maybe still running current War Robots on the live servers are not going to be able to handle this. Now that said, don't freak out and start throwing stuff already. From my understanding, what we've been told, what's in the documentation, is that the preset performance, they're looking at basically as long as your phone, your device is newer than, say, this is the example they gave, than say an iPhone 5S, which if I'm not mistaken, that's a pretty old phone, you should be good. I think the 5S is the phone that I started War Robots on back in like 2014. I could be completely getting that wrong because I've since switched over to Android many years ago, but that's the phone that they mentioned. iPhone 5S and up, you should be fine. Now, if you want to run ultra settings, they're saying that if you had a phone that was considered pretty powerful around the time the iPhone 7 was released, then you should be fine to run ultra. So Android is a little different. It's a little trickier with the way Android works. There are going to be some links to some tools that you can basically use to test the version of what they call OpenGL on your Android device. And that supported version needs to be OpenGL 3.0 or higher. 3.0 is the minimum to run the preset for performance. Now, I know we're starting to get into the weeds here technically a little bit, starting to get a little nerdy, but I'm going to put some links in the description that'll help you out and try to figure this stuff out. But I wanted to give you guys all the information that I was given. It really doesn't sound sound like it's going to be some drastic cutoff. Like if you don't have the latest generation flagship smartphone, then you're just left to eat dust. It seems pretty reasonable to me that with graphics of this caliber, something that we've only seen on the PC before, or some other much more powerful device than, say, smartphones of the last few years, naturally you're going to need a little bit of an upgrade to your hardware. But it's looking like anything that you've currently got that you're most likely playing the game on, you'll be fine. The second caveat is that there will be more graphics options later on down the road. So it sounds like for the initial release, and we'll get into the actual testing dates in a little bit, and we'll also talk about the actual release date for the finished product. But for the initial release, once it goes live, we're going to have the two graphics presets, Performance and Ultra. But what they seem to be indicating is later on down the road, there could be room to add in more specific graphics adjustments. And I don't have the details of what would be available, but you could use your imagination. Anti-aliasing, gamma control, things like this that are pretty standard for even mobile apps these days. So that would be absolutely amazing to see that. And that could also help the player more fine-tune the game to their preference, their liking, and their device. Before we get into some more specifics that came about as a result of some questions that I asked, let's talk about the release dates. We're going to talk about two different dates. We're going to talk about the release dates for the actual finished War Robots Remastered update, and we're also going to talk about the testing dates that are going to be separate test server sessions specifically for War Robots Remastered. Again, all subject to change, work in progress, you know how things go. The testing dates, tentatively for right now, are the 28th and 29th of April will be the first specific War Robots Remastered test session. And again, I'm going to have some links for you guys in the description that you can follow to see how to get involved in that. There will be a number of these public test sessions. They're talking about something like 6 to 8 test sessions. They're going to incrementally roll out more maps, more robots, more content until everything is stable and ready for release. And then again, I mentioned it earlier, but I believe after that, they will start rolling in the Ultra preset so that we can test that as well. Now, once we are clear of these specific test sessions for Remastered, then we'll start to see the actual release on the live servers. Now, what they're aiming for currently is a fall release. Sometime in the fall, no idea specifically when, I'm sure they don't really know either. Sometime in the fall, they're looking to release this thing, and it's going to come in phases. You're not going to get necessarily every single specific aspect of Remastered in the first initial update. Now, that said, subject to change, don't shoot the messenger. What they're planning to have available for the initial release are all of the robots completely redone and 4 of the maps. And then from there, we'll get the rest as it comes, as it becomes available. They'll push it to live. And what I'm hoping for are some of those back-end improvements, some of those quality of life improvements. I'd still like to see a reload button. There are geometry issues that need to get addressed. Targeting is another one. And that leads me to my next segment of this video, where I'm going to go through all of the specific questions that I asked about some of the things we just touched on and a whole bunch of other stuff. And on some of these things, I got some pretty good answers. On others, it's going to be kind of like a TBD, to be determined. We'll see. Okay, so we've covered all of the basics to do with War Robots Remastered. I've given you basically every scrap of information that I received in the little packet that I got, and other smaller interactions that we had with community managers and just kind of sussing things out. I've given you all the basics. We talked about visuals, the graphics, what it actually looks like. That's the main focus of Remastered. We talked about the interface. We talked about game mechanics, your account progress, the graphics preset options, and the release dates for when it's actually going to come out on live, and the testing dates as well. I literally just spilled hot coffee down my pants. Note to self, edit out the part about the hot coffee on the pants. What I'd like to get into now at this point in the video are the specific questions that I asked of the devs through the community managers. We had a really good Q&A session where we were allowed to ask anything that we wanted about Remastered. I'm going to go through my specific questions. I'll also cover a couple of the other really good ones that were asked from the other YouTubers. And then we'll talk about some other things as well that I initially posed to them and they didn't have an answer for immediately, but they were good enough to get back to me with hopefully some encouraging news. I think it's encouraging anyways. These are in no particular order. Maybe they are. I don't know. The first thing I asked about was targeting. Targeting is one of those things that's been a problem for a while, particularly since Titans were introduced. I think something must have changed with the scale of the game because Titans are, 5 times larger than every other robot on the field, and it's really kind of screwed up targeting. I also asked about the issues where your targeting brackets snap to other players or enemies that you either don't want to target or can't. Perhaps they're too far away, they're out of weapons range, or they're actually behind cover. It's one of those things that really plagues players and can be incredibly frustrating, especially in a really tight game. You guys have seen this when trying to target, say, Ao Ming's, and you can't get a lock on him because he's at a certain extreme angle to you, or vice versa. You could be in your main, you're trying to target somebody else, you can't get them. There's just something there where the scale just isn't quite right. So that was the first thing I asked about is targeting going to specifically be addressed as part of Remastered? Something like targeting obviously overlaps with a couple different areas of the game. It has to do with interface, and it also has to do with game mechanics. So the initial answer to my question was, unfortunately, no, targeting is not being specifically looked at as part of Remastered. That was pretty disappointing to me because I kind of feel like that is a major game-breaking bug, and I was really hoping that that would be addressed as part of this huge update. Now, that said, before anybody runs to Facebook and starts creating evil Pixonic memes and whatnot, what came about as a result of this question was actually a pretty good exchange with the community managers and the devs, and we were able to basically highlight this issue and bring a lot of attention to it. Myself and some of the other YouTubers that were asking questions, I hate that word, YouTuber, or is it a phrase? Sounds stupid. But anyways, people who make videos about the game, we were able to really get their attention because they wanted more information. We gave them all the specifics, as I mentioned earlier, and they really seemed to be receptive to what we were saying. So I'm hoping that this is one of those things that they can address after they get through whatever they had intended for this initial phased release. Maybe this is something that could come in that second or third wave of back-end improvements. What I did get specifically answered about the user interface is that mostly it pertains to what they call asset optimizations and the visual updates. So sort of off the cuff translating that, I'm guessing that is referring to, say, like the cursor, the targeting that you see on the screen. Some of the other assets are being further optimized so that they're not quite as wonky as what they are currently. Visual updates is pretty self-explanatory. It's probably just going to look a little nicer. It also probably has something to do with the fact that the rest of the graphics are so much better. They're so much crisper and clearer and high resolution. Obviously, the on-screen user interface probably has to be changed to match. So that was not the answer I was hoping for. However, I'm going to circle back to some things when we get towards the end of the questions that I asked and some other positive things that resulted from those questions and subsequent discussions. That sort of gives me hope that those things will be addressed at a later date as a part of this remastered update. The next thing I asked about was if the on-screen controls are ever going to be movable and scalable. I would like to be able to rearrange them. I'd like to be able to scale them. I have very large hands. They're basically the size of small dogs. And so sometimes the little tiny buttons that I'm expected to press in the heat of the moment, I can't hit. I fat finger it and I either don't hit it or I hit something else I didn't mean to hit. So I'd like to be able to scale those things, kind of move them around, just have more user-defined customizations. So what I learned is this isn't going to be part of the initial release, but it sounds like as a result of some of the other changes on the back end of the remastered build, it is something that they're going to look at for future updates. The next thing I asked about was, of course, lag. So a lot of players experience this. It's not all necessarily your network or your Wi-Fi connection or your 3G or 5G or whatever you're on. A lot of it has to do with the server side of things. This is where I learned that Remastered focuses almost exclusively on client-side improvements, what's happening on your device. I'll circle back to server lag in a second, but I wanted to make sure that I emphasize they made the point that the game will perform better on your device on the client side. It will have higher frames per second, fewer crashes, and will generally be much more stable than what it is currently. All good things. However, didn't specifically address lag, but once again, the cool thing is that we had an interesting sidebar conversation about lag, and this is where we learned that there is a separate and parallel server team. There are actually many teams. There's a core team, there's a remastered team, there's a server team. There are all kinds of teams with their own separate duties and responsibilities that are continuously working on every aspect of the game. But we learned that the server team is continuously looking at lag and server-side performance, and they are constantly trying to improve it and upgrade it. It's just that it's completely a separate thing from the remastered project. Now that said, I talked about some of this stuff earlier in the video, and a lot more came as a result of these discussions, but it sounds like with a lot of the back-end optimizations, even though they are client-side, I think the appearance of lag, sometimes we blame lag, we think has to do with the server network, is really something going on in our device. I mean, my kids do it all the time. They complain about, Dad, my game is lagging. And what I'm seeing isn't actually lag from the network or the server that the game is hosted on. It's their device, it's their computer, it's something else that I kind of have to stop and explain to them. But we've sort of used lag as this general term to sort of cover any kind of defect in the game that is not helping us play and enjoy ourselves. And in some parts of the world, when you're lagging, it means you're drunk. So there's that. So server-side lag, connection issues being worked on constantly, however, by another team. The next thing that I asked about, I ask them this probably once a month. I've asked them this 50,000 times. I don't really understand why we don't have this, but I would love to have native controller support in War Robots. I would love to have their proprietary on-screen mapping software, either as maybe a second additional app or built into War Robots itself, and just be able to map whatever Bluetooth controller or however you want to work it with their software tuned specifically for their game. Now, obviously, there are other ways to do this. There are third-party software solutions. There are controllers and things that will allow you to do this. Most of them don't quite do it with the fidelity that I'd like to see. When you get it native from the developer of the game, you experience a fidelity that's just unimaginable. It's exactly like playing with on-screen controls, except you're using a controller. And for some of us, that is a much preferable way to play the game rather than have that tiny little phone. Even a big phone is small in my hands. It's way better to have a full-size controller for someone like myself. Sadly, they're not offering controller support as part of Remastered. So, once again, I kind of felt like a kid there holding his cluster of balloons and another one just got popped. So no controller support for this guy. That said, and I can put a link in the description, or you can go look at somebody else's video, like Chief or something has a good video on the Apex controller from FlyDigi. It is a Chinese company, but I gotta tell you, the thing works great. It is the closest thing that I've ever been able to get back to when I used to run my Shield tablet, and it's built-in mapping software and proprietary controller setup. That was the best experience I ever had with War Robots. The game updated at a certain point, I think it was update 3.8, and it broke that functionality. Whatever it was NVIDIA was doing, it just didn't work the way that it used to, and I never could quite get that same level of fidelity back. However, this Apex controller, it's almost 99% of what I had before. So, solution for me, not the answer I wanted, but I can kind of understand how that's not really a priority for them. The next thing I asked about were geometry issues. We all know there are a lot of geometry flaws in the game. There are instances where player robots can get inside of things they shouldn't be inside of, building structures, what have you. Sometimes you can shoot through things that you shouldn't be able to, or get hit by things through cover when you really shouldn't be experiencing that. And specifically, I asked about the dreaded ramp bug. If you're not sure what they call it, you've probably almost certainly experienced it, where anytime your robot runs down, say like a decline, you get this weird skipping effect that basically causes you to move very slowly down that decline. It could be a physical ramp, like a structure as part of a map like Yamantau, or it could be just like the side of a hill. It's super annoying. It's something that was introduced a couple years ago when they changed something. I don't even remember what, and they actually addressed it. It sort of got a little bit better, but it's still there. It's still present. Sadly, I think I alluded to it earlier, geometry is not really being changed in Remastered, so you're likely to still see the ramp bug. What I was specifically told is that this is something that pertains to what they call movement logic in the game, and again, that is not an area that Remastered is focusing on. That seems to be a separate department, a separate aspect of the game, and hopefully will be something that they can take a look at once we get past this latest update. One other question I want to cover real quick that was asked, I didn't ask this one myself, this was another person in the group, but they asked about emulator support. I know a lot of people play on emulators and they'd really like War Robots to support that. However, Remastered is not going to have emulator support at this time. So, not exactly getting a lot of the answers that I wanted, but I did ask something and did get a positive response. I asked about screen refresh rate and frame rate. As a lot of you know, newer flagship phones are featuring screens that refresh at a rate of 120 hertz and some even higher. However, gaming apps or apps in general, they kind of have to be able to take advantage of that high refresh rate. Otherwise, it doesn't really do you any good. So, at the initial release point, Remastered won't support 120 hertz refresh rates. However, they're looking at moving the frame rate supported up to 60 frames per second. Currently, you probably know this, but it's capped at 30 frames per second. So if we get this and it goes up to 60 frames a second on your more powerful devices, you're definitely going to notice how smooth it is and how smooth it plays. On the specific question of the refresh rate, they said that that was something that they were going to look at once they kind of get the initial push of Remastered to the live server. They seem pretty high on the possibility of 120 hertz refresh rate, just not an initial release. It's something they can look at adding at a later date. So not to be ungrateful, but what I kind of did was I asked for whatever information they could give me for back-end improvements. That's where me personally, I'm more interested in the quality of life stuff than necessarily the fancy graphics. I think it's great. I think it's gorgeous. I love what I've seen so far. I think it's going to be awesome to have what I showed you in these clips on my phone when I play every day when I log in. However, I would like to see some more back-end quality of life improvements. I'd like to see bug fixes. I'd like to see some of these things. Now, what I was told, basically, they went back to their tech guys, and what they brought back is the following. Remastered is primarily focused on rewriting the code used for graphics rendering. Now, that's why I sort of prefaced all this up front. If you look at this as primarily a graphics overhaul, then you should be pretty pleased. They are also focused on rebuilding the architecture on which all all weapon and robot abilities are based. A lot of the code they've been using since 2014. That stuff is old, and they're basically cleaning it out, and they're updating it with new code that allows them a lot greater flexibility in taking care of issues, fixing problems, and hopefully getting us to some of these things that I personally would like to see in another massive update, like the bug fix update. That's what I'm really looking forward to. I kind of touched on it earlier, but a lot of this specifically has to do with weapon interaction, special abilities on robots. There's a lot of stuff they're kind of doing, but they're sort of just kind of like winging it. A lot of this rewriting of this code will allow them to have that be a much more concrete experience for the user. So as a result of me kind of pestering them with some of this tech stuff, bug fixes, the back end stuff, the stuff that you don't really see, it's kind of like watching your sausage get made. You know, I'm kind of wanting to know what's going into the sausage. But what did kind of come out of it is a sense that they are constantly working on these issues. It is a parallel aspect of the game's development. It's just not specifically tied to the remaster project. What was explained is that the issue becomes promising that they fix the ramp bug with remastered and then don't. You know, that's major pushback from the player base. You promise that, hey, targeting is going to be fixed here. It's sort of hard for them to say that, yes, we are going to address and fix these things and we're going to do it in this time frame when they don't know that for sure that they can deliver. And if anyone has run a business or been involved in dealing with customers, you don't promise things you can't deliver. So taken from that perspective, I can see why they're not too keen on giving me details on bug fixes that are really outside the scope of remastered. That was just more like the fanboy in me, like really hoping for some of these issues to be addressed with this massive undertaking. So what I'm going to do here is kind of give you my general impressions of the remastered project, my takeaways, what I kind of learned getting access to some of these materials and having this exchange with the developers and the community managers. First and foremost, this is primarily, overwhelmingly, a graphics update, a visual improvement to the game. It's not a completely new game. It's not a 2.0. So here at the end of this process, and having learned everything that I have about the remastered project, I've kind of tempered my expectations. Early on, when I kind of just got word of it, I was like a kid in a candy store. I was like, oh my God, we could do this and we could do that and we could do all this. But that's not really the focus. What we can expect is an absolutely gorgeous game that performs better, consumes fewer resources, and plays better on your mobile device than anything we've seen. And it looks like something that's on a PC. So yes, I'd like to see a lot of these technical improvements that we've sort of talked about during the course of this video, but that's just not what this project is focused on. Now that said, I was able to get some answers. I was able to dig up some information, and so were some of the other guys asking questions. And I got kind of like a warm and fuzzy feeling that they are aware of those things, and if they weren't before, they certainly are now. And that although this is primarily a visual improvement to the game, there are a lot of back-end things to do with the coding and the performance of the game that are being improved and will allow for some of these fixes and some of these improvements to take place in the future. Besides all that, one of my big takeaways, and probably the first or second thing in my head when they told me about it, was that it's great to see an investment of this scale into the game, or a reinvestment, really. The scope of this thing, obviously, they're sinking a ton of resources in this. This stuff doesn't come cheap. It's not free. They're putting a lot of work into this, and it's nice to see a developer do that in a game that's 6 years old. This thing came out in 2014. Not all games can say that they've made it that long. So seeing this magnitude of reinvestment in the game gives me hope that we have many, many more years of War Robots in front of us. So that's going to do it for this video on the War Robots Remastered project. That is everything that I've been told. That's everything that I know. All of my specific questions that I got answers to, and some that I didn't get answers to, but maybe got some sort of hopeful bits for the future. Moving forward, when I get more information, or if I get more video clips or more images or what have you, I'll drop another video about it, and I'll let you guys know as soon as I do. I asked everything that I could think of that I thought was relevant or important. If I missed some stuff, let me know in the comments. If there are things that you would like to know, and if it's a good question, I'll ask it. My line is still open to the devs and the community managers, so I can still ask questions, I can still get answers. And if it's something really salient, then I'll definitely post that, or I'll let you know in one form or another. And as always, I will see you next time at the Center Beacon.